All right, so today we're going to be talking about, I have this slide title, How to Evaluate Identity Providers, but really, what do you look at to make sure that you're going to future-proof your identity solution for the future, or identity solutions? My name is Kelvin Brewer. I've been in identity space for a good while, worked in a number of different, for a number of different companies, and I've moved around a little bit in the identity space. I've worked with privilege management, I've worked with access management, I worked a long time in the governance space, working with a product in that area. And along the way, I've learned a lot about government. I've been in public sector that whole time. Learned a lot about government and a lot about what it takes to implement successfully an identity project. So one example that I have for you, it was a few years back. I was working on selling some of the product I was working with at that time into an agency. And we asked them, how many identity products do you guys have that you've struggled to implement or haven't implemented? And they said, well, 5. 5 identity products that all do the same thing. We've spent, and they gave us a huge dollar number on services that they've spent on trying to implement them, and we've just never gotten there. And every one of them is just basically sitting on the shelves except for some outside use cases. And so that's what we want to talk about today is, what are we going to do in the identity space to evaluate the right vendors to work with that are going to future-proof your identity solution and help you to actually get it implemented all the way. So right now there's a number of business drivers in the identity space. But really, there's 2 populations, right? You've got the workforce, you've got the citizens, and in both cases, you're trying to attract top talent, retain that talent, and protect them from cyber issues. And so, really, the identity experience they have that drives their personal experience, right? Whether that's a citizen coming in and what they have to do to get to the assets, or it's someone in your workforce who needs to come in and get access to the applications that they use on a daily basis. And how do you secure that while not compromising their experience? And there's of course, a ton of things out there technology-wise. You can see there on the slide, it's going through a number of different, just kind of throwing up a bunch of technology terms up there on the things that manage experience versus security, and trying to find that balance. And in a lot of ways, I look at that diagram and I think it's a little bit wrong, because I think the security piece is kind of like the bottom of an iceberg in the ocean. A lot of times that piece is much larger than the experience piece sitting on top of the ocean that you can see, and that's why it's so important to make sure that the identity companies that you're working with cover certain things we're going to be talking about today. So different categories when you're going to evaluate what solutions you're going to work with. One would be core capabilities, of course. What do they actually do with their product? Does it meet your use cases? Is it going to help you accomplish what you need to do with minimal coding, minimal customization, and as much out-of-the-box capabilities as possible? Does it integrate with your business properly? And does it meet your enterprise requirements? So first, let's talk a little bit about core capabilities, and I'm focused on the identity and access management side of things, so I'm not touching on the governance side of things in this presentation. And so when you're looking at identity companies and identity and access management, one of the things that you want to look for is one that allows you to automate the user experience as much as possible. And by automate, I mean that's for the people who are maintaining the software, right? The user experience of what it takes for a user to log in, how many times they get prompted for 2-factor, when they get timeouts, all those things, that is part of your security posture and the experience for your user. But the place where there's been historically a lot of difficulty in identity is in setting up and creating those journeys for the users. The piece where, what does it take to put together how that user is going to authenticate and be authorized into your environment? And so what you want to look for is something that allows you to do drag and drop, easy to configure, easy to reuse templates for those user journeys that you can change quickly. You can implement different technologies as they come out. Look for software that allows you to easily implement what I would call plugins, but that could be a point solution that you need to include. One example as an identity provider, the way we do things at ForgeRock is if you need to do identity proofing, for example, for your citizens, we're going to have, we need to have the ability for you to do a plug and play with that so that you can change vendors if you need to in the identity proofing space. This is an example of an orchestrated user journey. So, user starts out with the process of entering in credentials. This is not taking into consideration the password list, and it's not taking into consideration the way we do things in government with the smart card, right? So this is maybe a citizen journey. But they put in their credentials, and if they don't have credentials or they're not registered, they would go into a registration flow. But in this case, if they have previously logged in successfully before, then you need to go in and check and do a scan to make sure that from a risk perspective, they meet within a certain criteria of your risk, and choose what their authentication method is going to be based on that user's risk. And then you're going to say, okay, well, we're going to make them this time, we're going to do a push authentication because that's what we need them to do this time based on their risk, and then log in successful. At ForgeRock, this is what that authentication journey looks like. That's a journey, that's our journeys being built in our drag and drop environment. And this is what I'm basing some of that on, is this idea of this is having a place where you can easily template out your user experience is key to support, because having it in scripts like it's traditionally been in a lot of ways causes a lot of overhead, a lot of support, change management's a nightmare. Whereas being able to properly orchestrate that user experience allows you to make it much more supportable and implementable. So just as an example, these user experiences, as it walks through this video, these user experiences are managed based on just simply creating that flow of data that you need for that login experience, for that user authentication and authorization. And this is something that I would look at for any identity software, is things like authentication journeys, but also implementation around workflows for access approvals, things like that. How easy is it to build those, support those, maintain those, create versions of those? That's what's essential, and how easy is it to test them? So all of those different criteria, when you're looking at any of these different journeys that a user is going to take, whether it's authentication or workflow for access approval, whatever it is, how easy is it to test and maintain and support? Secondly, when you're looking at identity and access management, what is the registration and self-service process? Now, registration doesn't necessarily apply to workforce most of the time. It could apply to contractors, right? But maybe not workforce as much, maybe B2B. But when you look at that process that it takes to onboard a user, to collect only the data you need at first, so that that isn't an overburdensome process, and then slowly collect more data as you go. And then also the ability to reduce help desk calls, right? And that's been a buzz thing for a long time, but seriously, when you think about that, I've worked with a number of state governments where they'll say, we can't force people to recreate their password when we go to a new identity solution, because if we do that, it's going to be a nightmare on the help desk, right? And so some of those considerations of, as we're changing over to a new identity solution, as we're moving to this new process, what do we need to do to reduce those help desk calls? What process are we going to follow to make sure that what we're implementing does not impact them? Now, a good solution for that, with the example I was citing, is to have a trickle migration where you can save the credentials the user puts in into the new identity solution, and what you're doing is you're doing a pass-through authentication to check to see if that user entered their credentials right with the old system. And then if they did, then you can just save them to the new repository and they don't have to change their password. But you're not bulk migrating the user population at once, because that means you have to do all this unencryption and re-encryption of passwords and everything. And so the users are entering their password themselves, you're checking to see if it's accurate, and then you're saving it. And that's just one example of a way to reduce help desk calls during an identity solution migration. The other thing you want to focus on is fraud prevention. When you think about what's happened during COVID, fraud has increased tenfold in government because people had all these opportunities to look at different programs that were released through the bills around COVID, and there was not time for a lot of the government organizations to put around these programs the process of avoiding fraud. So how do you avoid fraud? There's a number of things you can do, but in the identity and access management space, what we're looking at is risk factors for that user's actions. We're looking at using AI/ML to reduce the attack surface and make sure that you can catch somebody who's fraudulently coming into a system, whether that's through registration, and of course identity proofing for the citizen population helps with that, but even with the workforce population, what's more important there with workforce is not catching it on the registration, it's catching it while they're accessing applications. It's looking at, okay, this user's behavior is not normal. There's something about what they're doing, whether it's where they came in from, whether it's what time they're accessing the system, whether it's the system they're accessing it from, whatever it is, we need to be able to recognize all of these risk points and react to those according to our organizational policy. And then, of course, with your citizen population, you want to make sure that they specifically have a great experience, that their registration process, their authentication process, that it hits that proper note of security while still providing a great experience for them so that they have personalization across different channels, because you're going to have different populations of people coming in. You need to make sure that they're experiencing something that they can do. And so that's giving those citizens choices. That's allowing them to use a two-factor methodology that they can support based on their frame of reference. So a 75-year-old person may need a different type of multi-factor than a 25-year-old. And so you want to be able to give them those choices. And then lastly, of course, and this is so important in government, is your privacy and compliance rules. So there's so much out there to work with. There's so many things. We focus a lot at ForgeRock on 800-63, of course, and meeting compliance there. Of course, the Zero Trust framework in the user pillar, that's a place where we work with a lot. But the important thing there is to maintain that regulatory compliance with the groups that you're working with and seeing how the solution is going to help you get there. If the vendor can't talk to you about how they help you meet the criteria of your compliance frameworks, then that's a big red flag. That's something you really want to look at, and that they maintain compliance. So in the access management space, one example is OAuth and OIDC, well, OIDC specifically just brought out a change to their spec that allows you to end user sessions at the server level instead of having those agreements, those access agreements last for a long time based on the user's agreement with the provider. So you can just end it in your timeline for that session, and then they have to go through and remake the agreement the next time they log in. And so how fast do your vendors actually implement those changes to specs for the different technologies you're working with? How fast do they react to changes to things like FIPS 140-2 becoming 3 and 800-53 becoming version 5? What are they doing to make sure that they're staying up on those things? On the business integration side of things, what are we doing? What is the organization that you're looking at? What are they doing to integrate quickly at low cost with your target systems? Because in the identity space, that's one of the things that you're looking at is you have the user layer, you have the application layer, and that identity system sitting in between in some form or another. So how do you, what kind of solution are they providing for you to integrate quickly at low cost for those systems? Because when you look at a lot of the legacy identity solutions, one of the things that they did was they had a whole bunch of tools, they had a whole bunch of functionality, and they would just It was like if you were going to build a house and the construction company came along and dumped all the parts onto your front lawn and then said, here's the blueprints, good luck. And that was the way that a lot of identity solutions worked back in the day. Nowadays, when you're looking at identity solutions, you want to say, how much are they going to help us out of the box, get to the point where we can be live without having to customize everything and put in a lot of services hours. And a lot of times, that's paying an SI for a lot of services for things that aren't business focused, they're functionality focused. And that's the change that we're trying to make in the identity space in this area, is to say we don't want to focus on the SIs doing a bunch of technology work. We want them focused on business process. We want the identity solution to handle the technology side, and then where the SIs can really help is coming in and identifying the business requirements and what that means for the technology. And that's where you want to see your identity solutions coming in nowadays. And the last piece on that one before I go to this next one that's important is that idea of your identity ecosystem is going to be more than one solution. How do they integrate and work together? Do they have stuff pre-set up so that they're going to function properly with, in our case, how is ForgeRock going to function with a governance solution? How are they going to function with point access management solutions like a FIDO2 provider or an identity proofing company? So those are things you want to look at, is how is that solution going to help you converge that identity ecosystem to provide the security stance that you need? And then the other piece is, how are they going to help you modernize while still supporting your legacy solutions? Because we all know speed of innovating in a lot of different spaces, but including government, is not always the fastest. So there's a lot of things out there, in the ecosystem, like mainframes, like systems that still use header auth and forms auth. And that's okay, but what are they doing to the identity solution? What are we doing to secure that for you, while still working with the new technologies to help you innovate? And then as well as giving you choice for deployment. And this is something that I think is so vital in the identity space, is supporting not just as a SaaS solution or not just as we can go on-prem. It's what choices do you have? Can you deploy on-prem still? Because you may need to in certain circumstances. Examples, in military being, well, the Navy, they need to deploy identity solutions to their boats. They have to be disconnected. That can't be a SaaS solution, but then they need to support things on land. So what options is the identity solution going to provide for you in a deployment? Do they support DevOps? Do they allow you to deploy to your virtual private cloud? Do they also have a SaaS solution that will give you options in that way? What is the breadth of selection on how you deploy your identity solutions, and can they meet all your use cases with it? And this is also something important when you're looking at the cloud, whether it's your own virtual private cloud or you're looking at a SaaS solution with an identity solution. You want to make sure that, and this is something that I believe firmly, I've worked for a number of vendors in the SaaS space, and the thing that I've seen is that a single tenant architecture is vital for scalability in the identity space. Supporting, let's say, 100 million identities takes a lot of horsepower. And using a single tenant where you're not going to get your APIs throttled, where you're going to be able to scale at the speed that you need to, have transaction levels that vary, where you don't have to get monthly bills, allows you to scale for your enterprise, for your agency, to allow you to build out the identity solution without having to worry about surprise costs as well as throttling on your traffic. And so it's just important to look at how can we deploy this solution, or how is it deployed in SaaS, so that it will handle what we need to throw at it. And then we've talked a little bit about this, but I just want to retouch on it. It's just vital that that regulatory compliance piece is there. We all know FedRAMP in the federal government is a big deal for SaaS. And but then you're also looking at, if you're still going to a virtual private cloud or on-prem with that flexibility of deployment, right? What kind of certifications are in place that make you feel comfortable with deploying that to your virtual private cloud, which may be running in GovCloud or whatever it is. And then, of course, and I just touched on this, but having that predictable pricing model where you can be certain that the bills you're going to get are reliable, that you know exactly how the pricing is going to work annually, monthly, however it works, that vendor does. What is your cost going to be over 5 years, 10 years for that identity solution? And can you plan for it instead of having surprises? Just to talk specifically about ForgeRock for just a minute, ForgeRock has consistently been a leader in all of the different, with all the different analyst reports. One of the areas where we are really strong in, of course, is in the citizen SIAM space, and we have a large footprint there, and we've been globally ranked as the #1 vendor in that space for a long time. And that's something that we really look at as a strength of ForgeRock, is that ability to scale, that ability to work with hundreds of millions of identities and handle the traffic, and give organizations the ability to support all of these complex use cases that we've been talking about. If you want more information about ForgeRock, we have some great evaluation guides out on our webpage. It's an important place to go to get that, just to get some information about what we do in public sector, what customers we already have, and our solutions for digital identity in the public sector. Any questions, comments? All right, thank you, everyone.